Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope you all can hear my voice loud and clear.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Aman Kaur, and I will be moderator for today's event. So, to everyone, welcome to the Crescendo Alumni Ambassador Talk. Today will be the first series of talk for the year 2022, and we will have our guest, Sebastian Tan, who will share his view and experience and how he managed to score distinctions. To all the participants, you may send your questions in the chat box. After the end of event, we will have a Q&A session for everyone.
Yes. Thank you, Amansti. It's an honor of mine to be invited here. Right. So, do we have any more participants, or is this?
I think we shall wait for them 2 minutes more.
Okay.
Because there is rise of numbers I can see.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah.
Sebastian, I think you can start to share your screen.
Okay. All right.
I think we can proceed.
Very good. Yeah. So you have to stop the sharing of this screen first.
Just a moment.
Okay. So can everyone see this?
Yes, we can see clearly.
Okay. Right, so I'll wait for 1 more minute, and I believe we can start by then. All right, so 1 minute's up. Good morning, everyone. And as always, it's been an honor to be able to come back to Crescendo International College and to deliver my my thoughts, views, strategies, and experiences as to obtaining first-class marks in my LLB years. Right. So this is the particular slide. So before I officially start my sharing session, I would like to first tell you what this session isn't. So this is a disclaimer of sorts. So the first thing is, it's not to discourage anyone, in the sense that because some of my contents here, they are relating to foundations, pre-examination preparations, especially in the start of the academic year. But these advice is still applicable to those of you who are nearing exams. So you still have some time before exams to do with everything, but you would need to do the adjustments accordingly. So the second thing is, this session isn't meant to be a straitjacket. It's not authority, in the sense that you should stick to your proven methods, especially when you're nearing exams. And if you like to try out my methods, you could experiment afterwards, but right now you should stick with what works, because I don't want to disrupt your flow, so to speak. So the third thing is, this session isn't a magic formula of getting first classes, because there is no hack. It's just hard work and some strategy, but there is no such thing as a masterclass that would immediately make you, a candidate for a first class mark, so to speak. Right. So with that out of the way, let's get into our flow. So we have 6 main things to discuss about. So the first thing is online versus written exams. What's the difference? Because I've went through both. I've went through written exams for my A levels, law, and year 1. And for my second and third years, it was purely online exams. So the second thing is the particulars of an essay, particularly the essay questions. So the third one would be the problem questions. So the fourth thing would be time management before exams, in that what could you do to prepare for exams. And the reason that I included time management here would be apparent later. So the fifth thing is references and materials. So this is obviously the part where you include more articles and stuff like that, so you could get higher marks. And the last thing is after you've given it your best, like what happens afterwards when you've done all these, right? So the preface. So how long did it take for me to hone my skills and etc.? I believe this is something which you would like to ask. So it took around 1 to 2 years, I would say, for me to develop a more complete understanding of the subject area and how to deal with it. But mostly it's my A levels. Mostly I dealt with it during my A levels. I researched how to write essays, how to write problem questions better. I kept making experiments. So it's mostly during the A levels time. Yeah, and once I started my LLB, it was basically just improving on the approach, right? So it's a long and enjoying process for me. Some might say grueling, but it's enjoying for me in the sense that I could just keep on experimenting, and it's really fun. But this process is essential for you to be able to obtain higher marks. I mean, yeah, you need to put in the hard work, right? So foundations, after you've done with exams. So right now, as I've said previously, you should just stick to whatever works. But after you've done with exams, for the current first years who are taking their first year LLB exams, you could study how to study. It is an experimental year, right? So you could work with the composition of essays, and you could also figure out group studying and individual studying, which one suits you best. Well, for me, I prefer individual studying by a lot, because group studying is usually just, well, I don't favor it, because usually when I join a group studying session, it's a group of friends, finding a suitable place to study. That itself takes some time. And then usually we study for around 10 minutes before we find that our pace is different, and we start to talk about something else, and we just wasted 2 to 3 hours in the library. So this is something which I don't prefer personally. But if you could maintain your discipline even in group studying, then, well, that might be the way for you. But I prefer individual studying. So we'll discuss the composition of essays later. So for the current second years, so this is a stage of maturity. So by this time, second years such as Miss Amandeep herself, I believe that she already has a system in which to study, So before you take my words at face value or at what it's really worth, you should exercise discretion as to whether it disrupts your current progress. Yeah, because as I've always said, I don't want to mess with your current flow. And this is something which I am always cautious in when I'm experimenting different studying approaches for my first, second, and third LLB years, because I've throughout those 3 years, my approach for studying is somewhat different. It's according to the difficulty of the subject matter, and also relevant to the change in exam format, such as, last year we had a really small word limit. We were really tight on words there. So this is the most substantial factor which let me modify my study approach. So this is something which you need to approach with caution, and especially when someone else is here to tell you about their approach. So you should first think of whether it's suitable for you before you proceed and to use my approach. Right, so let's move into the more technical parts. So written exams versus online exams. So I believe that some of you here, you've only gone through pure online exams, and Miss Amandeep has also voiced to me the worry about, if all you've went through is the online exams, then what happens if you proceed to CLP and it's written, right? So these are the things you should take note of. So speed, obviously, is a very crucial factor. So written exams takes more stamina because you need to write a lot, and it's much more stamina consuming compared to typing. So you would experience a decline in speed later in the exam, especially when you're exhausted, when you're tired. So this is something you should take note of. And memory, written exams are much more demanding. This is no joke, all right? Because even for typed exams, I understand that you can you could refer to textbooks, you could refer to your previous scripts in front of you, but you just type it out, right? But in written exams, you have nothing to refer to except your statute book, which I would recommend to not overly reference your statute book, because it's a waste of time flipping through the pages. You only reference the statute books when you're really not sure, or when you need to copy the statute out per verbatim. So usually I won't touch the statute book. So third thing is plagiarism. So the good news for written exams is that it is relatively loose or relatively lenient on plagiarism, because it's memory. So examiners, they attach weight for you even if you just copy it out, because at least you memorize, right? So this is something which the University of London examinations, they actually published it in the pre-examination updates or some supplementary documents, in the sense that in online exams, they actually attach less weight as to pure recital, which means from pure memory, as compared to written exams. But for online exams, this is a really, really high risk, because I've had friends, I've had classmates, and also seniors and juniors, they encounter this problem, and they get 0 for their particular subject. So my advice is, don't reference particularly student essays without discretion, right? Because if, let's say, you try to take an essay from your seniors, please bear in mind that their essays will already be in the database, especially for online exams, right? So the effort, you must take a substantial effort to alter the structure of the essay to the extent that it's no longer plagiarism, but it's your own words. But if you're going to spend that much effort in modifying an essay, then why not just draft an essay from scratch yourself? Because that's what I always do. I always draft from scratch. And I could proudly say that I don't really refer to anyone's essays. Yeah. So, just build an essay from scratch. It's easier. And you also gain a deeper understanding of the subject area, right? So right now, let's move into the difference between type exams versus copy and paste exams, because for the past two online exams, we've had copy and paste, in the sense that we use a Microsoft Word, and after we're done with our script, then we upload it to the VLE, and we just send it up. So in the sense, so you could copy and paste because you're using Microsoft Word. But for this year, I'm of the knowledge that you are going to type in a platform called Inspera, and your browser would be locked, very similar to what I've done 2 years ago. It was another platform. It was also online, and it locks your browser and everything, except that it had bugs. So it got removed and replaced with Microsoft Word. So right now, type exams there are really some differences. So the first difference is as to typing speed, because you need to type everything out, right? So it actually bears more similarities with handwritten exams, in that you need memory and you need whole analytic skills. Now, why would I mention whole analytic skills here? Like, it's common sense, right? You look at problem questions, you need to analyze essay questions as well. The particular reference here to analytic skills is because stress, see? Because you can't copy and paste everything out. So it indirectly contributes to a lot of stress, in the sense that you can't just prepare your answers. You can't just copy and paste all 4 scripts which you've prepared, and then just modify your answers, right? You have to type everything out. And when you type, sometimes you may mistype, or sometimes you might miss a paragraph here and there, you might miss some points. And so you would need to go back and modify it. And the thing is, you're already short in time, and typing is obviously also more stamina. It takes more stamina compared to just copy and pasting. So the thing is, could you maintain high standards under stress? So this is also true for written exams. So what are the possible methods to deal with it? So the first thing is to prepare written scripts in front. I mean, obviously, I think that's what most of us would do, because it's just easy. You don't have to memorize. You just type it in front. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad idea. In fact, if I were taking LLB exams for this year, chances are I would also do that. But the thing is, it's best for you to memorize or to understand what you're doing before you do it, right? So you can't just prepare. You can't just rely completely on written scripts, because there is an increasing trend that for each and every year, there are going to be questions which aren't asked in previous years, a new focus or a new mix in the problem questions. So what you should do is you should understand what you're doing first, especially for problem questions and for essays, because for essays, sometimes they might ask a different focus. They might make something else, and so the subject which you're required to discuss is relatively different as compared to previous years. So if you don't understand what you're doing, you might miss a really substantial part of what the examiner expects you to discuss, right? So when you understand what you're doing, you would naturally memorize it, right? Because when it just comes naturally. You don't have to memorize it for the sake of memorizing. You memorize it naturally by virtue of understanding it. So how best to utilize prepared scripts? This links to the second point, which I've said just now. So is it relevant to the actual question? So again, you need to memorize and understand for you to be able to identify whether your prepared script is relevant to the actual question. Now, I would also like to clarify in the sense that, written scripts, you're not copying and pasting in the sense that you're not plagiarizing if you use your own scripts, because it's your own words, right? So please make a distinction between copying directly from the subject guide or some textbook without explaining it in your own words versus just typing your script out, which is already in your own words, all right? So please make a distinction around there. So this is what I did, or what I practiced for my type exams. Yeah, so this is, you guys should take a look, if you haven't seen this type of picture before. This is basically a typing exercise, and it took me around 2 to 3 weeks to get a hang of it. Yeah, previously, it's quite unnatural for you to type with 10 fingers in the first place. But after that, it just gets really smooth, and I'm glad that I picked up the skill, right? So those who would like, you could screenshot this particular slide. So after that, we will move to the particulars of an essay. So, what should you do in an essay? So firstly, introduction, you should address the question. It's a map for examiners, in the sense that because your essay is going to be quite lengthy, right? It's also mentioned in the University of London pre-exam updates or supplementary documents that the introduction is supposed to guide the examiner from the top to bottom. So you should set out in your introduction what you are going to do later, each and every paragraph, your material points. You should just set them all out so the examiner can follow your essay later on. Because like when we're reading a book or we're reading a novel, sometimes if we don't look back on the previous chapters, we might not follow what actually happened later. So it's best for you to introduce a map for the examiners. So set out your essay plan concisely, and this not only helps the examiners, but it also shows the examiners that you are being very organized and not just writing anything that you thought in the heat of the moment, and you've actually planned this through so that you could, and only then could you set out a well-organized introduction. So we move to the content. So content, be specific and relevant if the question asks for it. Now, if the question asks for it here, this refers to specific focuses, So it's like, us being Crescendo students, we would know that, Mr. Gary, Mr. Lewis, our lecturers, they would usually categorize essays into general focus and specific focus 1, 2, 3, right? So the general focus is obviously you can write everything inside. You could just show off your vast general knowledge, and these essays are the likes that I would like to do, because I could show off my my knowledge base around the subject area. But if you are dealing with a specific focus, please be specific and relevant. Let's say for third years, you're taking jurisprudence. So let's say the question asks for Hart's rule of recognition, and it doesn't really ask for the rule of adjudication and the rule of change. So you should just discuss the ROR and not discuss, all three. I mean, it's not that you can't, but if you discuss the ROA and the ROC, then you're dedicating something to, you're dedicating your space to content which is irrelevant to the actual question. And you could have discussed the ROR in greater depth, or you could even discuss compare and contrast, other jurists and in respect of Hart. So be specific and relevant in the sense that this helps you get better marks. And also be generous with articles. So I'll also mention this later, but for essays, generally you should be prepared to read a lot of articles. Yeah. So it is only with these articles that you could stand out from the rest, because for problem questions, the answer is in the question itself. Like if you can identify the issues, the question literally gives you the answers, right? But if you, in an essay, you just have a short sentence for the question. It's like blah, 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 dot, discuss. That's usually the format of our essay questions, right? Just one short sentence. So what could you do to show off your knowledge base? Obviously, articles. That's the obvious solution. So conclusion, you should sum up your points and relate back to the question. So conclusion is something that I believe quite a number of students would take lightly, as I've also taken my conclusions lightly previously. Yeah, because the conclusion is meant to sum it up so that the examiner doesn't have to go back to the introduction. And it also shows that you have in mind what you're writing from the start until the end. So that shows that you're really organized. If you're just organized from the start and you're organized at the end, it shows that maybe at some point in writing an essay, you might have forgotten what you're actually writing, and you just simply write a generic conclusion to wrap things up, and it doesn't leave a really good impression on it. So don't take your conclusion lightly. So this conclusion, in a sense, it's kind of similar to the introduction, but the difference is in the introduction, you're setting things up from the top to bottom, and for the conclusion, you are wrapping things up. You are linking your points back to the introduction, and you're basically explaining the whole thing. But you can't just say refer to my introduction. You can't just say that in your conclusion, right? So you have to rephrase your introduction in a sense for your conclusion, and also take a stand. So if I believe you would all know by now that during my second year, I got 3 first-class marks, and I only got 1 second upper for my family law. And it is also the case that in my family law exams, in one of the essays, I did not take a stand. So it's like, because I thought that both stands were, both arguments are legitimate. So I couldn't really bring myself to a stand, see? So it's like, I didn't make a stand for that particular essay. So maybe that's what led the exams think that, okay, maybe he doesn't really have an opinion. And what he does is just reciting. So maybe that's why I got a second upper for my family law, and I got first for the other 3 subjects. So please take a stand. So after that, we have the common mistakes of an essay. So the first common mistake is top-bottom approach. I believe you've all heard this from Mr. Gary. I believe he's quite particular about the top-bottom approach. And it's also mentioned quite a few times in our University of London supplementary documents. So the top-bottom approach, in case you didn't know about this, it's the exercise where you address the question in the introduction and the conclusion, and nothing more than that. So when you're writing the content, those who have the top-bottom approach problem, they don't link to the question in the content itself. This is one of the common mistakes, all right? Because if you don't link, well, you can't establish a strong link between your answer and the question. So when you don't do that, so obviously the examiner is going to think that you're just reciting. You're just reciting, and you're just parroting everything out, and you don't understand the question, because it's easy for you to link to the question in the introduction and the conclusion, because there's no content there. But if you can link your content towards the question asked, that shows that not only have you wrapped your head around the question, but also you are able to understand the link between your content and the question asked. So this is important. So second thing is irrelevant law, principles, and articles. Well, now this is a result of you not having prepared thoroughly, because you should be able to identify what the law is, what the examiner is going to discuss. I mean, I understand that some essays, they might be tricky. It might look like focus 1, but it's actually focus 3. But this all boils down to a matter of preparation. If the question is tricky, you should have prepared more. And yeah, there's no easy way around this second common mistake. So the third common mistake is a messed up sequence. Well, this is usually a result of both a lack of preparation and nervousness, especially in the middle of an exam. So I believe in typed exams, I'm not touch wood, but it might happen a little more often as compared to copy and paste exams, because you might get a little jittery during the exams, and then you might mess up your paragraphs and whatnot. So if you've practiced often and you've done the due preparations, then you should be fine with this. So what you can do, so for the top-bottom approach and irrelevant law, what you can do is you should link your answer in every paragraph and understand your topic before you do so. So this links back to what I've said previously. Please read up consistently. Understand your topic before you do it. Don't just memorize. So the second thing is messed up sequence. Plan well and practice more. So this is something which I believe that I don't have to tell you how to do, because everyone has a system for doing this. Yeah. So you should read up on at least you should read up on your lecturer's notes, your subject guide, and preferably textbooks if you can. So after that, we have problem questions versus essays. So after I've said everything, relating to essays, you might think that, essays are a pain. You hate essays because you're going to write a lot and it's all academic commentary, and, maybe you would not even know what you're actually writing about because you don't understand. Maybe it really takes a large knowledge base to be able to write a good essay or satisfactory essay, all right? So some of you might think of going for problem questions instead of essays. It looks straightforward, and the answers are in the question itself, so why not? But what are the differences? So the first thing, the basic differences. So problem questions are limited to the issue at hand. Yes, the question itself, you are limited to that and nothing more. But for essays, you have the freedom in expressing a point and a wide scope of reference, but it still depends on whether you get a general focus or you get a specific focus. So one of the differences is also the ease of preparation. So generally problem questions are easier, or at least I feel that it's easier to prepare for essays because you are just required to identify and apply the law. But for essays, you have to critically evaluate. So that is of a higher, then the critical evaluation part is a higher skill in Bloom's taxonomy, right? But the exception for this is the subject of evidence, which you encounter in your third year, and of course CLP, right? Because in evidence, they usually mix everything up in one problem question. They don't divide it chapter by chapter like contract, like property law. Evidence is everything in one problem question, and things might get a little complicated, especially in the technicalities. You will know that when you're up to third year. So as to the further considerations, there is a difference. There's a different balance between case law and academic commentary, in the sense that case law is mostly used in problem questions and academic commentary mostly in essays. So for case law, you have to explain the principles in the case law, in common law, and you have to apply it to the case study. So this is, if you like this, if you're a practical person, then maybe problem questions is your thing. But if you like academic commentary, if you like, theory, what is the idea of justice, what is the concept of law, then probably you're more towards the academic side, and essays would suit you better. So the particulars of a problem question. So for the introduction, you would have to identify all material issues which you seek to discuss later succinctly, right? So you would ask me that what difference, does the introduction of a problem question bear with the introduction of an essay? Well, for an essay, you basically have to write everything out in your introduction. You have to introduce the flow. But for a problem question, you don't have to introduce the entire flow because you're going to write it out anyways. And I believe that the examiner would be also, it's easier for the examiner to follow a case study question than as compared to an essay question, right? So what you need to do is the areas which need to be discussed, like say contract. So obviously you would first discuss the elements of a contract, consideration, intention to create legal relations, capacity. Usually we first set out the elements of the contract to see whether the contract is valid. And you could also then add in the introduction that, assuming that if the contract is valid, then, the party in the question, they would have an issue on misrepresentation or mistake later on, the vitiating factors of the contract. And probably you could also write damages in the introduction, like, is it expectation interest or is it reliance interest? You just set up all these material issues in the introduction, but you don't have to set it out in great detail as compared to an essay. So as to content, apply only relevant laws and principles. This is more true in problem questions. Yeah, see, because your answer is limited to the issue at hand, but be flexible, because especially in evidence, they expect you to include articles in your answers, even in problem questions, right? So you have the luxury of not doing so in years 1 and 2, but for years 3, you need to, right? So you should demonstrate the relevance for academic commentary to be used in your problem question. So I've actually consulted some seniors when I was in LLB years, and their usual approach is that because they can't find a link between the articles and the problem question, right? So they just include the articles at the very end of their answer, like after they've concluded, and then they just write those articles out and stuff and just explain what those articles were talking about. Now that is a fail-safe approach in the sense that you are still showing the examiner that you've read the articles, you've done your homework. But for me, that's not such a good idea if there's something better that you could do, right? So what I did was, for some of the principles, like say when I need to apply case law, I also include some academic commentary in the case law. Like say if the case law is problematic, then I will introduce 1 to 2 articles depending on the subject area, of course, to just basically discuss that. Okay, even if we apply this case law, but this case law is a bit problematic in the sense that blah blah blah, and then you write a bit of the academic commentary, and then you could conclude with but even so, the current law as it stands is still this particular case, and therefore, despite its problems, we should still apply this particular case, and therefore party A could not something. So you just mix a bit of the academic commentary, but not too much, because after all, it's a problem question. And for the conclusion, sum up neatly and provide a clear solution. So the conclusion for problem questions would usually be much shorter than essays, in the sense that it could even be a one-liner, because your discussions are already done in the body of your problem question essay, your answer, right? So the conclusion and the very objective of a problem question is just for you to present a solution. They are asking you, the client is asking you, how could he solve this problem? Then you provide him a solution. It's that simple. You don't have to conclude, you don't have to include academic commentaries in your conclusion, right? So just sum up neatly, provide a clear solution. Whatever you've discussed, you just write all of your solutions in your conclusion. and that's it. Like say, okay, for contract, let's say for contract, there is a valid contract, and however the contract is voidable due to misrepresentation. So you just write that, you just write that in your conclusion, provide a solution, and yeah, that's it. Right, so maybe some of you would prefer problem questions over essays, and maybe some of you would prefer essays over problem questions. Well, I personally prefer essays over problem questions, but I also came to the realization that eventually you must be able to handle both. And this is very true for your third year, because in the first year, it might still be easy, although your legal system and method and public law, these are compulsory essay papers, but you would find that these essays are not so hard, right? In the sense that you don't really have to include a lot of articles for your essay to make sense, or for your essay to stand out to a substantial degree. And the problem questions are also, relatively easy to handle. But for your third year, you have jurisprudence, and jurisprudence, being a pure essay question, can be quite demanding. Yeah, and you also have evidence. Well, usually we do essay questions in evidence because they're more straightforward as compared to a very convoluted problem question. But you should also face the reality in the sense that there is a substantial risk that you couldn't prepare all 4 essays for evidence, and you would have to resort to 1 or 2 problem questions, or maybe even 3, right? So you should be able to, not should, you must be able to handle both. So those of you who are aiming to get high marks, and also those of you who are aiming to pass, all of you basically, you should be able to handle both, right? So after that, we get into the particulars for preparing for exams. Now that we've gotten the concepts for problem questions and essays out of the way. So practicing time management before exams. So a question that I usually get from my juniors, and also one question that I frequently ask myself during my LLB years, is that how could one memorize all of this, especially in A-levels? I remember for the first time when I'm doing a time test, I could only write 1 page half in 30 minutes. And that's terrible, if you ask me, right? So how could you actually do it? I mean, I believe most of you here would already have done it, it's March. And if you're not being able to do this now, you don't have much time left to brush up on these skills, but just let me break it down for you so that it becomes more apparent to you that even if you are lagging behind, what you could do right now. And those of you who are, making progress and staying in line, maybe you could also benefit from this particular breakdown. So the first thing is you should time test yourself. It's a hard way, but it's reliable. Because in a time test, and I'm referring to written time test, not typing, you are under a lot of pressure in the sense that you need to write everything out in 45 minutes. And for me, when you write something out, the memory retention is much better as opposed to typing, or as opposed to copy and paste. Obviously, you can't retain your memory in copy and paste, right? Because you're not etching something in your memory, so to speak. It's like, I feel like when I'm writing on paper, I'm etching something in my brain. It just helps a lot later. So even though your exams are typed, I would still recommend that you carry out written time tests by yourself. And I believe that by this point of time, you've already gone through your mock exams, and you would have a very clear idea as to what a time test is, right? What the actual exams look like. So please do your own time tests, and also practice writing out essay and problem question outlines. So these outlines are the ones that you should write out in all 4 questions, which I like to do. And obviously those would be, tougher questions, so that I would be able to impress the examiners more easily and also get higher marks, right? So during those 15 minutes, after you've identified the 4 questions which you'd like to do, And all the issues in those 4 questions, I write out the outlines in the question paper. Like I write it out at the side of the question itself. So yeah, you need to practice a little bit, how to write in cram spaces. You need to flesh out, you need to write out the skeleton for your essay or for your problem question, so that when you're speed writing later, or speed typing in this case, you wouldn't blank out suddenly and don't have anything to refer to. So this would definitely happen, because when you're writing, you are now inclining towards speed writing. Your mind is focusing on the need for speed, right? So it's not so prudent for you when you are focusing on the need for speed and you still have the entire skeleton in your head. It's like you're playing your phone while you're driving at 180 kilometers an hour. You can't split your mind in both. It's not so prudent for you to do so. So a better way for that is to just draft your skeleton out on the question paper. And when you're speed writing or something, okay, fine, definitely you have some degree of memory in your brain as to what you're doing right now. But just in case you blank out, or just in case you need to take a breather, you could just blank your mind for like 5 to 10 seconds without any worry that you might forget what you are writing, because it's all set up in the question paper, right? So the third thing that I would suggest is that remember points and not paragraphs. Well, some of my friends and classmates, how they do it is that they memorize the entire essay and they reproduce the entire essay. So I'm not saying that it's a bad idea, but it's not a good idea for me, because memorizing an entire essay, it takes up a lot of data in your brain, so to speak. And if you happen to forget some words in that paragraph, you might mess up your entire paragraph, right? Because it's per verbatim. It's much more demanding on your memory as compared to if you just remember points. And secondly, if you remember points, you also, in a sense, have understood the subject matter, because you can cut down a complex subject matter into just some points. You could simplify the subject matter, and that shows your mastery over the subject matter. So please remember point and paragraphs. So the last thing is you should understand the laws and principles. So this relates back to my third point, in the sense that if you understand the principles, you would have a better flow in your answers, and also what I term as natural memory, because you memorize by virtue of understanding, right? You don't have to spend another effort on that. So it also helps when improvising is needed. Now this is very important, because the trend now is that, as I've said before, questions which you've never seen before. So in case you had to do that question, at least you could still improvise a little. It's not a complete blank, in the sense that you could just simply write not simply write anything out, because when you understand the law and the principles, you are organized, So when you're organized, what you write out, the answers you write out is of quality. So this is apparent in freestyle questions. So this is a little joke between me and my friends, in the sense that the examiner is like asking you, hey, do you know freestyle, when they ask you some questions, because the question is like, it's like so freestyle. It's like you've never seen this question before, like what? And it's never been tested before. So just really, just in case you've had to do these kinds of questions, at least you have something to pull out of your hat. And I've also heard stories of my senior. He did a freestyle question and he got a first-class mark in that subject. So it's not impossible for you to get even first-class marks in freestyle questions. And I believe that, oftentimes the examiner might actually attach more credit for your audacity or your bravery in attempting freestyle questions, because it's never been tested. And if you could still show off your knowledge, just whatever that goes, the examiner would be impressed. I mean, I would be impressed, if you could just whip up something which has never been tested before. It really shows that you're not parroting, because it's something which is impossible to be parroted because it has never been asked before, right? So you should also prepare for these contingencies. So references and materials. Now we're getting to the part where, you know, most of you will be concerned about, like, how did Sebastian get first class marks? Well, now the answer is here, and really it's no secret. You know, all of this is familiar to you. Notes, utilize them to their fullest extent. What I mean here is that you shouldn't just read the textbook before you understand the notes, our lecturer's notes, because there is often a misconception that, you know, oh, textbooks are more more professional. You know, you seem more professional when you're carrying a thick textbook than, you know, some flimsy lecturer's notes. And actually, during my A-levels, I would also like to read up on the textbooks first. Okay, not that I'm saying that our lecturers' notes are bad. In fact, they're pretty good. You know, they are really nice and neat digest of whatever it is that we need to study. But I like to refer to the textbooks in the first place during my A-levels and year one. No, I think maybe during my A-levels, because, you know, it gives a more complete picture of the law. You know, you don't have to like, oh, really? You don't have to come to the realization that you actually haven't covered a small area, which is covered in textbooks, but not in the notes, because the notes are meant to be succinct, right? It's meant to be brief. But later I found out that notes are there to help, you know, in the sense that they are there to help you grasp the basic ideas of the subject area. And when you have a basic grasp, then obviously you can move to the textbooks. But before you go there, you should look at your notes, because, you know, it saves time, right? And some complex point in the textbooks, they may be actually explained in a very easy manner in your notes. I've actually experienced this a few times, you know, like in the textbook, like there are some concepts which I don't understand, and I had to read it for quite a few times before I understood what it said. And I was like, okay, I was fairly convenient what it said. I was fairly confident as to what it said. So, okay, good. Now let me go to the notes. And in the notes, that particular concept is not only explained, but also explained in a really easy manner in, say, 5 to 6 sentences. Then I feel a little stupid, you know, when I read the text, when I read my notes after I read my textbook. It's like, why didn't I read my notes first, right? So please read your notes first. They help you save a lot of time and effort, and also help you to understand the subject area better. So after you've done that, then go to textbooks for those of you who are greedy in absorbing knowledge. Well, I am greedy, all right? So the second thing is textbooks. So one may not be enough depending on your aim. So one may not be enough here refers to the further reading, which is in your subject guide, you know, that just in case, I believe some of you here, you know, didn't really go through your subject guide at all, right? Your module guide, and most of you know, just read our lecturer's notes and that's it. We don't really go through our subject guide. So you should go through a subject guide, because they actually recommend a lot of materials in there. And one of them is textbooks. You know, it's in the front few pages. It's in the introduction of the subject itself. They'll set out, you know, core reading, core textbooks, further reading recommended. And the one textbook that you should have in hand is the core reading, which you could find in our library, right? If you don't want to buy an original copy, you could also go to our library. You could have a read up in our library. And if you decide that one textbook is not enough for your palate, it doesn't suit your palate, then you can go to the further reading, because, like, for example, jurisprudence, there is the core reading and there is further reading. But in the case of jurisprudence, I would say that the core reading is more than enough, because there's a lot to cover. And the core reading is itself a dictionary. It's 1,500 or 1,600 pages. That is your core textbook. So you don't really have to refer to any other textbooks, right? And your core jurisprudence textbook also has a lot of article digest in it. They have extracts of articles. So it's quite convenient, see? So one may not be enough depending on your aim, but obviously you should also look at whether you could stomach all that. So articles, if any one of you would, if anything could be categorized as sort of a secret weapon, I believe articles are the closest to that description. Although, as I've repeatedly claimed, that I actually have no secret weapon. You know, it's articles, textbooks. So articles, you would ask me, how could you find lots of articles? Like, I can't even think of articles. Like, okay, so the articles are actually pretty easy to find. Just look at them in your textbook. There are footnotes. In your textbook, there are, footnotes which the author uses to explain something or to quote something. Usually you would find the articles there. Or you could also go to the module guide, and there will also be recommended further reading at the end of each chapter. If they don't recommend anything, then maybe you should go to a textbook. So these are two main places that you could go. And after you know about the name of the article, then you proceed to online library. I personally recommend Westlaw. So you don't have to worry about not having enough articles. Just worry about whether you can stomach all that. So just for reference, for 1 year, for each LLB year, I think I've read at least 100 articles, at least for all 4 subjects, not one subject. That makes 25 articles per subject. Yeah, I think yes. I think at least 100 articles. And yeah, so you see, you don't have to worry about not having enough articles. And of course, in the footnotes of the articles themselves, they also refer to other articles. So it's like article upon article upon article. You just find a lot of them. And usually what I do for articles is that I don't print them out because it's a lot, But what I do is I would save them in Microsoft Word or in my iPad or whatever. You could highlight, the articles. You could do some notes there, and then those points which you think are relevant in an essay, you then refer to these points. You just write the article title, and then you just quote those points in the article, or maybe you would like to paraphrase it, then you don't have to add the apostrophes, right? So that's what I do usually. Sometimes if I'm short on time or if I'm feeling really tired, I don't read through the entire essay, the entire article, because you don't have to do that. What you should do is you should, okay, from an exam perspective, from an exam-oriented perspective, you don't have to read through the entire article, so long as you get a gist of what the article is talking about. And then you can make reference to several points in the articles, in your essay, or problem question. But, all right, and this is a big but, be cautious about what you're quoting, because what you're quoting might not be what the article is trying to say. Sometimes you might just read one part and you think that, okay, this is what the article is trying to say. But sometimes it might not be the case. So even though I said that you don't have to read the entire article, please also get a gist of what the article is trying to say, what the article is trying to argue. So in that respect, I would recommend you to first go through the introduction and the conclusion of the articles. Or if you're really, really short on time, like now, because it's March now, you can go straight to the conclusion, right? Because those article authors, they are definitely way more experienced than law students. Oftentimes they are professors, they are master students. So their dissertation skills will definitely be there. It's sort of guaranteed. And the articles which are recommended by University of London and also used in main textbooks, they're also definitely articles of quality. So you could just go to the conclusion where the authors sum up everything. And if you think that there is some point which you would like to make reference to, then you go back to the content and just quote it in more detail. Right, so this sounds all like a huge pain, right? So after all of this, you've done the preparation for problem questions, for essays, you need to prepare for exams. All of this, it's arduous, and I'm not joking, I'm not kidding. I enjoy it, but it's still arduous. It doesn't change the nature of law being a really taxing subject area. So, but after all that, is it guaranteed? Are you guaranteed to get a first class? So before this, I thought it was, because for my years 1 and year 2, I would say that things went mostly according to plan. Because okay, year 1 was actually above, because I was thinking, maybe getting a first class for 1 year 1 subject is good enough, and I got 2. For my second year, I wanted to get all 4, but as I've said before, my family law, that little problem. So I got a second upper there, but I've got first for the other 3 subjects. So I was thinking, okay, if I can plan it, then I can do it. But for year 3, it's an unexpected outcome. I believe that some of you would have known that I did not get any single first class mark in my 3rd year. It came as quite a surprise to me. And it also shows that, sometimes things just, it's unexpected, because as law exams, they are quite subjective. As you already know, there's no MCQ, it's no math where, theoretically everyone can get 100% mark if everyone knows the answer, if everyone can solve the equation or whatever. You can't even get above 80 marks in the law exams. So this to a substantial extent speaks to the subjective nature of law exams. And the closest mark in my 3rd year, which I've gotten to first class, is 68 jurisprudence. And as you've all known, as you all would have known, there's no 69. It's either 68 or 70, right? So it's just there, but for some reason it didn't step into the realm of first class marks, right? So even if you didn't achieve this, even though you didn't achieve the marks that you would like to achieve, please live comfortably with your results, as success has various measures. So for me personally, I believe that it's not really about the end point. It's not really about what marks you get or what grade you get, so long as you learn something from your degree. So I would say that I've definitely picked up a lot during my degree, because the effort which you would spend in studying, preparing, researching, it lends a lot, it helps a lot to your overall prowess and definitely your overall confidence. So in that sense, if you've actually learned something from a degree, and if you've actually learned a great deal from a degree, then yes, you have succeeded. You don't have to be a first class. You have to get exceedingly high marks to prove your success. But obviously, you should still attain the minimum standard. Just because it's subjective doesn't mean that, you could just get a 40 in every subject and say, yes, I've learned something from my law degree. That's not the case, right? So for me personally, an acceptable mark would be around a high second lower, like say 55 and above, to second upper marks. That would be a reasonable target for you to aim. Not only because it is the minimum requirement for CLP, but it is also something, getting second upper overall, it speaks to that. It speaks to the fact that you've actually done your research and you've studied quite a lot, right? But as to the first class mark, whether you can get those top marks, that is sometimes it is really a matter of preference, see? And it's also according to the graph, as you all would have known, that in every exam there's a graph, right? And the top few students, they get the first class, and then the rest, they get second upper, second lower, and so on and so forth. And examiners, being the academicians they are, academicians, they often have quite different views on a similar subject area. So it's no surprise that if one examiner favors the direction of your argument and the other doesn't. But overall, if your argument is sound, you've done your due research, your marks won't be really low. There is a standard. Your marks would be there. It's just whether you can get the 70 and above. Now that is a bit reliant on luck, I would say. But mostly, if you don't prepare, then you could never get a 70 mark and above. Right. So that's basically what I have to say for my experiences. And please ask any questions. I'll go through this last slide before I open the floor for any questions. So if you have anything that you would like me to address, if you have any problems in writing essays, writing problem questions, you don't know how to prepare, maybe your research, you don't know how to conduct research, then please raise those questions in the chat, or you could also unmute your mic and ask me directly. I wouldn't mind. But before then, just let me go through this last slide. So this is something a little extra, which is categorizing your subjects. So this is, I believe this would be most helpful for the first years, or the audience here who's still not in an LLB yet, and you would like a general guide as to how should I study, how the subjects look like. So there are some similarities between the subjects. So I would group legal system and method, public law, and jurisprudence in one category, in the sense that they are all pure essay-based papers. They are all theoretical, and except for legal system and method, I believe the other two would be quite a pain for some of us, right? For those non-academicians, right? So I'll group these in one category. And oh yes, also for public law and jurisprudence, you would also need to refer to quite a number of articles, especially for jurisprudence. But I also did refer to quite a number of articles for public law, right? So the second category would be contract law, property law, and equity and trust, in the sense that these are all like business type laws, and it's all like they all have their elements, they all have their exceptions, and it's generally, to me, they're generally of a same type, because it's talking about trading. Contract, so it's talking about trading. Property is talking about trading in land. Trust may be a little different, because the concept of trust is quite unique, as the third years would know, and as the others, and as the rest of you would know once you move on to the third year. But yes, generally they are of a similar nature to me. And the third category would be criminal law, tort law, and evidence, in the sense that they are all laws where someone hurts you and you would like to sue them, or you would like to complain for the public prosecutor to charge them. But tort law is civil law here, and evidence relates more towards criminal law, but generally I will still categorize them as the same type. And company law and commercial law, obviously, it's, I guess it would be self-explanatory. Company, commerce, it's all one category. And the last thing will be family law. I believe that family law is a more unique category, in the sense that there is nothing, I believe there's nothing similar to it. So I believe that this category is actually what I had in mind when I progressed to my second and third years, in that I was looking at property law and I was saying, okay, maybe this is the second year equivalent for contract law. And obviously the subject area is different and all that, obviously, but maybe the system for studying could be, maybe I could match the system of studying contract law to the system of studying property law, and so on and so forth. So I hope this helps. And that's it. So any questions?
Okay, as now Sebastian had done sharing his slides, we will keep the floor now open for the Q&A session. You may ask your questions